there's been a cultural shift that's been happening, a cultural moment that's been happening surrounding Michael Jackson. It's way past due, and it is testament to the innate ability of human beings to cover for people that they consider talented. There's something in psychology called the halo effect. The halo effect essentially suggests that if you think somebody is good at one thing, it means you think they are good at all things. So you tend to think that beautiful people are smart. You tend to think that people who are smart at one thing are smart at all the things. You tend to think that rich people know what they're doing when it comes to everything. And that's just a normal human tendency. We tend to make snap judgments about people, and then we take those judgments too far and we generalize more broadly. Well, two things are true of Michael Jackson. Immensely talented human being, evil pedophile, right? Those two things are true of Michael Jackson, at least if the allegations are to be believed, which all evidence suggests they should be. And people are having a really tough time connecting those two. They're having a really tough time overcoming the cognitive dissonance of, I like Michael Jackson's music, and I was a big fan of his when I was 10, with Michael Jackson was an evil human being who preyed upon children. Now, both of those things can be true. And this new documentary, Leaving Neverland on HBO, which I've been watching, is indeed extraordinarily upsetting. It demonstrates how depraved Michael Jackson was. There's a piece at National Review by Kyle Smith talking about this. He says, debuting on March 3rd and 4th, after a previous series of screening at the Sundance Film Festival, this enraging film by Dan Reed inspired a lawsuit against the pay cable channel from Jackson's estate, which desperately wants people not to see a story that may significantly diminish the value of his brand. It's a wonder there's any brand left to defend, given that 4 men have now made detailed, credible claims that Jackson sexually abused them as minors over extended periods of time. Well, there are a bunch of lessons to be learned here. Well, some of those lessons include, again, our capacity for cognitive dissonance blinding us to the reality about human beings. Second, the worship of celebrity that we have in our society. The rise of a television and movie culture, the rise of an entertainment culture that puts celebrities before our faces all the time, makes us think that we know celebrities. It used to be that people who were very famous felt distant and far off. Now people who are very famous feel very close to us. And so it's very difficult for us to believe that those people could actually be evil and participating in acts of evil. When we're engaging with the public world, it is deeply important for us to recognize that human beings are still human beings, even if they are rich, powerful, and famous. And maybe even more so then, because fame and wealth and power, these things allow people to gratify their worst urges and lead other people to basically give them the okay to do so, thinking, of course, that the person wouldn't be rich, powerful, and famous unless they were also morally good. Now, this also has raised some serious issues about pedophilia itself. And it demonstrates what we have lost as a society when we decided that biological urges on any level are basically an excuse to do what we want. We have a very weird divide in the Western psyche right now when it comes to biological urges. On the one hand, we believe that biological urges give us moral impetus to do the things that we want to do. So if you want to have sex before marriage, you have a biological impetus to have sex before marriage. That means it's okay to have sex before marriage. At the same time, there are obvious biological urges that people don't want to give the go-ahead to because they're in fact evil. So if a man has a biological urge to rape a woman, then we say, no, you're not allowed to do that. You are evil. Your biological urge does not overcome. And yet it's that broad blanket statement that biological urges are somehow an excuse, that in the Lady Gaga morality, born this way is somehow an excuse for behave this way. That's deeply troubling. Now, again, I'm not comparing homosexuality to pedophilia because they are completely not the same thing. One is a consenting relationship between two adults, and another is the exploitation of a child. The point that I'm making is that as a general rule, a society that fails to draw moral lines around things like consent and instead draws moral lines around things like biological drive or biological urge is a society that is going to fall apart at the seams. And it seems that we are moving in that direction, that we have failed to allow morality to guide our views of personal behavior. And once we don't start setting human limits to the biological urges that we have, we get ourselves in some very serious trouble. The reason that I'm bringing this up is there's a column from Dahlia Lithwick, who is a legal analyst writing over at Slate.com, in which she has a piece called, "Is Pedophilia a Crime or an Illness? We've never quite known whether child molesters should be treated as sick people or punished as criminals." She says, on Sunday, HBO premieres Finding Neverland. Again, and for all the wrong reasons, we can't take our eyes off Michael Jackson. Whether or not the allegations are substantiated, the question is in the air. Is pedophilia a disease to be treated or a crime to be punished? Are people who seduce minors sick or evil? Our current legal and medical systems blur both views. We call for the most draconian punishments, life imprisonment, castration, permanent exile, precisely because we view these acts as morally heinous, yet also driven by uncontrollable biological urges. If sex with children is truly the product of freely made moral decisions, then we should deal with it through the criminal justice system. But if it is a genetically overdetermined impulse, an uncontrollable urge nestled in our DNA, then punishing pedophiles must be morally wrong. This is what Dahlia Lithwick writes. As science and culture increasingly medicalizes bad behavior, finding a neurological component to everything from alcoholism to youth violence, we run the parallel risks of either absolving everyone for everything or punishing criminals who are no guiltier than cancer patients. What science has revealed, says Lithwick, about the moral medical roots of pedophiles is, of course, ambiguous. What is clear is that the binary choice laid out above is an oversimplification. The medical community, which started to view pedophilia as a disease rather than a crime in the 19th century, has amassed evidence that at least some violent and antisocial behaviors have genetic links and signposts. But researchers have been unable to isolate a biological cause for pedophilia or even to agree on a personality profile, not to mention the terrific confusion within the medical community in defining what this disease really involves. Until a few years ago, for example, the DSM-4, the Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, defined pedophilia as a disease only if the sufferer's fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. In other words, a non-impaired, remorseless pedophile is apparently perfectly healthy. By the way, it is worth noting that that is exactly the same language that the DSM-5 now uses with regard to transgenderism. They suggest that transgenderism is not, in fact, a mental disorder unless it causes clinically significant distress or impairment. Okay, so what we have been doing is medicalizing. And again, transgenderism is not the same as pedophilia. Transgenderism is an adult making a decision, presumably, to behave in a certain way that does not impact other people in violation of their consent. Pedophilia is, of course, the exploitation of children. I keep repeating this because there are going to be people who don't understand the argument that I'm making and seek to conflate all of these things. They are not the same, right? Homosexuality is not the same as pedophilia, is not the same as transgenderism. Pedophilia is something apart because it is morally evil. Because it is morally evil. But the point that I'm making is that when we medicalize evil, then we also run into the danger of suggesting that human behavior is not controllable and that we are not responsible for our actions. And that is the death of a civilization. The reason that I bring up the Dahlia Lithwick column is because she suggests that if sex with children is truly the product of freely made moral choices, we should deal with it through the criminal justice system. If it is genetically overdetermined impulse and uncontrollable urge, then we can't punish pedophiles. But here is the point. The belief in a free functioning, free society has to be that reasonable human beings have the capacity to overcome their biological instincts, that human beings have the capacity to overcome their tribal affinities, that human beings have the capacity to overcome their urges. If we don't believe that, we cannot have a republic. And here is where psychology shades into politics. We are now living in a world in which we are told that we don't control our own behavior, that our behavior is controlled by impersonal forces far beyond us, that there's institutional racism, sexism, bigotry, homophobia, that controls your life, that it is the broad-based economics of the American system that have determined the future of your life. None of that is true. That your tribal affinity, that your membership in a particular racial clan, that determines how you will be treated and how the rest of your life is laid out for you. None of that is true. That your choices are not your own. Once you believe your choices are not your own, you end up justifying all sorts of evil behavior. Once you believe that choices cannot be freely made in contravention of biology and tribal affinity, it's very difficult to have a functioning republic. And this is why, in the end, the bargain between Jerusalem and Athens, between religion and reason, is deeply necessary. All of human life is based on a certain number of premises that we have to assume. That all of Western civilization is based on certain things that we take for granted. And many of those things that we take for granted are things that we actually get from religious premises. So we all take for granted Greek reason, right? The idea that we can reason our way in and out of problems. Science is an outgrowth of this belief in human reason and our capacity to reason. But even that capacity for reason is based on even deeper roots. That capacity for reason is based on the idea that you are a free individual capable of exercising a logic that exists outside of you. That you are a free individual, not completely bound down by biology, capable of making choices. That you are not just a cluster of meat wandering through the universe, reacting to the environment around you. You do will your own action. You have the capacity to will your own action. And in politics, you are in control of the decisions that you make. And that in your personal life, you're in control of the decisions that you make. That responsibility is the key to a fruitful exchange. That you can't reason with people who don't believe they're responsible for their own actions. That reason itself is undermined by the belief that human beings are not freely capable of making choices. That is the conundrum we find ourselves in. We've made excuses for ourselves as a society, blaming all of our activities on outside forces or internal forces. But the more you think of yourself as a free actor acting in a free country, the more responsible you're going to be, the better you're going to be, because the more responsible you are for your own actions. Right now, we have a society that is dedicated to removing responsibility from people, and then simultaneously, in fits and starts, we will try to restore responsibility for certain people. We'll try to go back and fill in the gaps and explain why Michael Jackson should be abhorred, even though we've undercut a lot of the rationale for abhorring Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson should be abhorred. He participated in evil activity. He was a free adult, one of the freest people on earth given his wealth and his fame, and he chose to do evil things. And his biological urge was not enough to excuse that. And the same thing is true for all of us living in the freest country in the history of the world. Now, I'm not talking that we're all pedophiles, but we all make decisions on a daily basis for which we are responsible. And looking to society or looking to biological urges or looking to anything else to blame for our own behavior is a deep problem for a civilization that hopes to continue functioning. If you want a democracy, if you want a republic, you have to believe that you are a free actor capable of acting morally. The generalized point, which is that we're going to have to stop pathologizing evil, that it can be true that you have a pathology toward doing something bad, but that you still have the capacity to overcome. That is the essence of Western civilization. And that is being ripped away from us. The only reason we're even having this conversation about whether Michael Jackson should have been basically treated as an ill person or as an evil person is because we have lost the capacity to see evil for what it is. Choices freely made by human beings capable of making those choices in contravention of their own biology. It used to be that you'd be able to say, yes, both. Yes, both. He's a sick person with a drive toward doing sick things. And also, he's an adult capable of overcoming that. But once we decide that we're not in control of our own actions, it's very difficult to make the case for Western civilization, for individualism, for human rights, frankly, because human rights are based on this idea that we are each individuals created in the image of God and that we have the capacity to make decisions freely and of our own will. You want to restore a system where people believe in right and wrong and where we are responsible for one another and where we don't hurt each other? We're going to have to go back to a system where we assume that your decisions are your own and not the product of some other evolutionary force or some product of some other environmental force beyond your control. Rights, the freedom, they come with duties. You cannot have duties without rights, and you cannot have rights without duties. And we as a society have decided to bifurcate the two. We want the rights without the duties, or we want the duties without the rights. You can't have it both ways. Freedom comes with responsibility. Freedom comes with your capacity and responsibility to choose.